Hello. I'll be very sad today. But nobody cares.
Which put him on the map of the so-called new atheists. That is, those of us who are sort of kicking back against the rise of religion into American politics. And then he followed up with a letter to a Christian nation, which is really one of the best written short treatises, just hard-hitting, right to the point, and it's a beautiful read. We have copies of both of those. His new book is The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Determine Human Values. I want to say something. This is an important book. You should read this book. You should buy 2 copies. You know why? Because there's a tradition in America, actually all Western culture, on December 25th, people give gifts. They do. They give gifts. And it's because Newton was born on December 25th. This? And, yeah. So I think it's a good idea as a gift.
Oh, that's a nice 2-player level.
It's already wrapped in gold.
What?
Seriously, it's a good read. It's as well written as Sam's other 2 books. It's an important book. The reviews have been quite mixed. Interestingly, I expected theologians, of course, to be unhappy about it. And philosophers a little bit, because there's a bit of turf war. You know, all academics have their turf they want to protect, and you scientists should stay over there, and we're over here. And so Sam crosses that boundary. I think that's a good thing. But it's the scientists who say, oh no, science shouldn't do that, in an almost like a God of the gaps argument that creationists use. Like, wait, there's a gap there, and science can't fill that, therefore it must be filled by something else. But of course, philosophers don't they don't fill the gap with the thing that theologians do, the creationists do. So what's the gap to be filled for moral arguments? So I think that even if you don't agree with all of the arguments that you hear today or you read in Sam's book, in fact, that's the whole point of science, is not to find agreement, but to actually launch into a new area to try to answer questions. That's what we do in science. We try to fill gaps. And so what I like about the response so far, some of the response I had to my own book, The Science of Good and Evil, is that you shouldn't even be trying to answer moral questions with science. You shouldn't even try. I mean, in principle, you know, that doesn't seem right. Now, we can disagree about things like maybe I would argue that the well-being of this conscious creature would be enhanced if taxes were significantly lower. But I'm a libertarian, so you might expect me to say something like that. And my liberal friends would say, well, no, come on, Shermer, that actually we're all happier. Our well-being of all of us is better if we fund certain programs that help everybody and lift everybody up. And we can argue about that, and that's kind of where the action is, right? But to say that science can never say anything about that, I think is disturbing. So that's what I like about Sam's book, is that he has the courage to actually get in there and say, hey, let's see if we can tackle this. Even if you disagree, that's okay. That's the whole point of science, is let's get in there and try to solve these things. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Sam Harris.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I on? Can you hear me? My mic? Yes. Well, thank you, Michael, and to the Skeptics Society. It's really an honor to be back at Caltech. And yeah, I think that, as Michael said, I think this is a very important conversation to have. As many of you know, I've spent the last few years publicly criticizing religion. The first thing you encounter when you do that are all the reasons why people think that's a terrible idea. And the first reason is never that there's so much evidence for the existence of God. The truth claim of religion is rarely what you meet, even when you're talking to fundamentalists. What you hear, rather, is that religion is the only context in which to talk about morality. It's the only kind of universal framework on offer in which to answer questions of right and wrong and good and evil. Now, I used to think that was a totally empty argument, and it is indeed a bad argument. It's not even an argument, because even if religion were an engine of moral behavior, that wouldn't prove that it was true, and it certainly wouldn't prove the existence of God. It wouldn't resolve the obvious contradictions between the world's religions. So it is kind of a non sequitur as a defense of belief in God, but I've come to feel that it's actually not a totally empty concern. because I'm continually colliding now with people in the secular community who seem quite confused about how we can think about moral truth and universal premise. Now, I'll give you the instance which I talk about in the book where this really seared onto my brain. I was at an academic conference talking, as I will today, about how we can think about morality in scientific terms. And I said in this context something that I thought was quite uncontroversial. I said, listen, we know that morality has to relate to human and animal well-being at some level. We know that human and animal well-being at some level must relate to the laws of nature and to the ways in which conscious experience arises in this universe. And therefore we know that there are going to be right and wrong answers to these questions, and it's just patently obvious that certain cultures are not maximizing human well-being at this moment. And I cited as an example the violent misogyny and religious bamboozlement of the Taliban as a culture that was not perfectly conducive to human well-being. Now, it turns out to criticize the Taliban at a scientific meeting is to court controversy. And so after I spoke, another speaker came up to me and said, well, how could you ever say, from the point of view of science, that the compulsory veiling of women is wrong? I said, well, the moment you relate right and wrong to the question of how human beings flourish, then I think it's pretty easy to see that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. Wait, it gets better. I said, okay, well, let's make it easier. Let's just imagine we found a culture that was removing the eyeballs of every third child. Okay, would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being?
That's your opinion.
And she said it would depend on why they were doing it.
Yeah, there's nothing except for laughter.
I said, okay, after I picked my jaw up off the floor, I said, okay,
people are disgusting.
Let's say they're doing it for religion.
With their open-mindedness and their opinion.
Religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. And then, without hesitation, she said, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, now this person has since been appointed to the President's Council for Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising our president on all of the ethical implications of progress in medicine and life science generally. Needless to say, she has a background in philosophy and science, and she had just delivered a, to my eye, totally lucid lecture on the ethical implications as she saw them for neuroscience in the courts. She was very worried that we would be using lie detection technology prematurely. She viewed this as an invasion of cognitive liberty, even with captured terrorists. She was worried that we would be scanning the brains of people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and this seemed like an Orwellian overreach for her. She was especially worried that we could be exposing captured terrorists to the hormone oxytocin, which mediates trust in the human brain, and it's harmless to be exposed to it, but it seems to generate trust in people. This was just unthinkable that we would be doing this. So on the one hand, you have someone whose moral scruples are really finely calibrated to our own possible missteps, and yet she's quite sanguine about the ritual enucleation of children, and it seemed to me totally detached from the unnecessary misery of millions of women living in the Muslim world at this moment. So I perceive a problem with this, and while this is the most glaring instance of it, I get this by the hundreds and thousands in emails and blog comments that people think, disproportionately well-educated and liberal and affluent people seem to think that something has occurred in the last 200 years of intellectual progress that has made it impossible to speak about moral truth. And this worries me because I think we are in danger of waking up in a world where the only people who are sure that there are right answers to moral questions are religious demagogues who think the universe is 6,000 years old and think they got these answers from a voice in a whirlwind. So I'm going to be trying to rehabilitate some of your intuitions about moral truth over the course of the next hour. The problem is always posed as a disjunction between facts and values. There's this notion that we have this universe of facts, which of course science can study, and this relates to science at every level, but then there's the most important questions in human life. Those questions about how you should raise children, and what constitutes a life worth living, and what is good and what is evil. And it's thought that these properties somehow have nothing to do with facts. That they're either drummed into us by culture, or they can be made up by personal whim, or we have these biologically conditioned preferences that are just not in contact with reality in any important sense. Now, I think there are many ways to see that this disjunction between facts and values, I think, is spurious and an illusion. I'm going to tread lightly over many of the hoary and I think boring arguments in philosophy on this subject, because I think most of them are unnecessary and misleading. But I just want to say there's going to be a Q&A afterwards, and so if you're sitting here over the course of the next hour and you think, well, he's clearly not acknowledging this absolutely knockdown argument in meta-ethics, I want to hear from you. Please get to the mic. Don't leave here with your doubts unappeased. But I'm gonna skirt a lot of the traditional ways of talking. Now, it's long been obvious that we have needed some universal framework to think about morality, because in the immediate aftermath of World War II, the UN tried to put forward a universal declaration of human rights, a completely sensible thing to do given what had just occurred in Europe. But the American Anthropological Association, in all its wisdom, came forward and said, well, this is a fool's errand. You can't do this, because any conception of morality is just a product of culture, and this is an instance of just one culture foisting its provincial views about good and evil on the rest of human society. This is just not this is an intellectually illegitimate thing to do. Now, please notice, this is the best our social sciences could do with the crematory of Auschwitz still smoking. This is 1947. Now, I'm going to argue to you that the gulf between facts and values is an illusion, because values reduce to facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. This is what we can value in this universe. And so the one concession to the philosophical argument I'm going to make here is, imagine this. Imagine a universe in which every conscious being suffers as much as it possibly can for as long as it can. I call this the worst possible misery for everyone. That's bad. Now, if you don't think that's bad, or you think there might be something worse, or you think that might be good in the end, I don't know what you're talking about. And what's more, I suspect you don't know what you're talking about either. So if you admit, it seems to me all I need for you to admit is that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad. If the word bad is going to mean anything. And everything else, every other state in which everyone doesn't suffer as much as they possibly can is better. Now here we have a continuum here of possible experience. And clearly, because the experience of conscious creatures is emerging out of how the universe is in some way, there are going to be ways to move along this continuum. There are going to be right and wrong ways to try to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone. These ways will be very much constrained by the laws of nature, and therefore fall within the purview of science. Now we have, I think, some very serviceable intuitions, ethical intuitions, that track notions of conscious well-being. For instance, we're more concerned about our fellow primates than we are about insects. And we're not concerned about rocks because we don't think there's anything we can do to make rocks suffer. And I think those intuitions are quite useful. I mean, that is what we are right to be more concerned about chimpanzees than ants because we think there's a richness of experience there that can be violated to a much greater degree. There are states of well-being and states of suffering that are possible for a chimp that are not possible for an ant. Now, again, one thing to notice here is that is a factual claim. This is something we could be wrong about. If in fact we are completely mistaken about the relationship between mind and matter, about the way in which subjectivity is structured by neuronal complexity, well, then we could be wrong about the inner lives of ants. There's no reason to think we are, but again, this is just to say this is a factual claim. This is a claim about possible experience. And even if you're drawing your morality from religion, even if you think the cash value of good and evil is in the end what happens after death, either you experience an eternity of happiness with God or an eternity of suffering in hell, okay, then once again, what you are worried about are changes in conscious experience. You just happen to think the most important changes happen in the next life. Again, this is a factual claim. There's very little reason to believe it, but once again, this is not a different framework. We're talking about a framework in which what can be valued is consciousness and its possible changes. Now, many people are concerned that the notion of well-being, the well-being of conscious creatures that I've introduced, is somehow so elastic and so difficult to pin down that it's problematic. Maybe I should have to define it better than I'm inclined to before I say that well-being is what we value. But consider by analogy physical health. Physical health is very difficult to define. In fact, life is difficult to define. And yet this hasn't stopped us from having a science of biology and a science of medicine. When this statue was carved, life expectancy for a person was 25 or 30 years. It's now about 80 in the developed world. Our notion of health is truly elastic. It could change, it is changing and will change as we make progress in medicine. If we may live to see a time when human beings are expected to regrow their missing limbs, say, like salamanders. And that is a biologically possible thing that we could engineer ourselves to do, and you would rush to a doctor if you found you couldn't do that. But the fact that health is truly open-ended as a concept doesn't, for a moment, make it difficult for us to talk about health scientifically. And no one will challenge you with the concern that, oh, well, maybe dying of terminal smallpox, maybe that is as healthy as anything else. You never hear this. The challenge I get on the subject of well-being is, well, you've said you value well-being. You've said you value a universe in which we avoid the worst possible misery for everyone. But who's to say that someone who wants to torture all conscious beings to the point of madness isn't as moral as you are? And this is the kind of what passes for a philosophical insight at this point. You don't get this. You don't get the challenge. Well, how would you convince someone with smallpox that he's not as healthy as you are?
Shit.
Now, if anyone doesn't think the analogy I'm drawing between well-being and health isn't a tight one, I'd love to hear from you, because I think it's actually a faithful analogy. And in the end, I'm talking about mental health and the health of social systems. Now, there are other ways to see that the split between facts and values is imaginary. Look at what we do when we talk about the most basic constituents of matter. We have this substance, water. For about 150 years, we've known that it breaks down into 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. What do we do when someone doesn't believe this? What do we do when someone comes into the room and says, well, you know, that's not how I choose to think about water? Or what do we do with a biblical chemist who says, well, chemistry for me is just what confirms the book of Genesis? Okay, people can use the word chemistry in that way, but they're not talking chemistry. And the only way to have a conversation about this fact, this least value-laden fact you can find, this is just as straight a scientific fact as you can present, the only way to talk about it is by appeal to values. You have to value understanding the world. You have to value evidence. What do you do when someone doesn't value evidence? What evidence are you going to provide to convince them that they should value evidence? Okay, what logical argument are you going to put forward that will convince them of the importance
This
of
clicks fucking harder
consistency?
here than it is on
So too with
Tartarus.
every other scientific value, parsimony, mathematical elegance in certain areas of science. These are values. We value principles of reasoning and observation that appear to bring our beliefs in contact with reality. So in science, there are no facts without values.
What?
There's another way to bridge this apparent gap between facts and values, and that's to look at what beliefs are, what we mean to say when we say that we actually believe something to be true about the world. And we did this with fMRI a few years ago. We looked at beliefs about facts and beliefs about values, which on the surface seem to be different. Beliefs about facts constitute science and journalism and common sense and everything that we claim to know is true. But then there are all these other beliefs about morality and meaning and spiritual experience, and we look to see whether at the level of the brain there's a difference in how people experience these truth claims. So we put people in a scanner and we gave them very simple statements to read that were either clearly true or clearly false, given their state of belief. And we did this from many different categories. And we found that basically belief seems to be content independent. On the left, you have the difference between belief and disbelief for all of our categories. There's logical and autobiographical and mathematical and geographical. And so you have this area of signal difference in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And we were able to break out two other categories, which happily were actually our most different stimuli. We had mathematics and ethics. And you can see there were no other active regions in the brain reporting a difference between belief and disbelief. And you can see, certainly within the tolerance of a neuroimaging experiment, these are essentially the same statistical maps. Mathematics were just equations that were clearly true or false.
Someday
and
I will
ethics
finally
contained
die.
statements like it's good to be kind to children versus it's good to torture children. These were highly value-laden statements. And yet the difference between accepting a statement to be true and rejecting it as false appeared to be the same. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on this, but it seemed to me that if the brain isn't doing something radically different when we're accepting truth claims about facts and accepting truth claims about values, then I think we should be suspicious of balkanizing our epistemology on this subject. So the way I think about belief is that it is our best effort to map reality in our thoughts. And when our beliefs seem to do that, when our beliefs about the world seem to survive all of the tests that the world can throw up at them, well, then we talk in terms of knowledge, and then our beliefs count as knowledge.
Am I retarded?
And clearly there's a continuum of facts about which we can form more or less accurate beliefs that relate to how human beings thrive. And there's clearly a continuum of difference. It is possible to live in a society where everything that can go wrong is going wrong. A place like Congo at the moment, where your moment-to-moment concern is avoiding being killed by drug-addled soldiers. And it's possible to move along this continuum towards something quite a bit more idyllic, towards something that resembles the kinds of lives we tend to lead, where you have the free attention and time to have intellectual interests and to value creativity and to worry about where your kids are going to school, and there's a huge difference here. And no doubt this continuum continues in directions that we can scarcely imagine.
Not even close.
It seems to me also patently obvious that there are right and wrong ways to move on this continuum. There are ways to think you're going to get out of a failed state and be wrong. And there are many levels at which we can understand the relevant variables. There's clearly a level of biology. There's the level of the genome. There are genes that predispose us to certain psychopathologies. For instance, psychopathy. And we know that psychopathy is, at one level, a neurological condition. A failure to feel empathy for other people is a neurological problem. But it's also a social problem, and we can talk about the influences on the human brain at much higher scales of resolution in terms of economies and
want to die so much.
Everything that can possibly influence the state of the human brain is relevant here, but clearly all of these domains and all of these details, no matter how complicated, fall within the purview of science. We are talking about genetics and neurobiology and psychology and sociology and economics. Now, I think it's easy to see that there must be right and wrong answers to the question of human well-being.
I want to die so much in real life. I want to die so much.
Just imagine it's just Adam and Eve.
I cannot fight it.
You ask yourself, are there right and wrong ways for these two people to try to flourish? Well, yeah, wrong way number one. They can smash each other in the face with a large rock. Now, it's clear that they could fail to collaborate. They can fail to recognize their common interests. But they can also succeed to a greater or lesser degree. They can defend themselves against larger predators. They can create culture. They can recognize that the best kinds of games to play are not going to be zero-sum between them. Now, how does this situation change when you add 6.7 billion more people to the experiment? I don't think it does. I think it just becomes more complicated.
6.7. It was so good when there were less people.
So what I'm asking you to consider is that there's a kind of
what do you need 8 billion for?
Where the peaks correspond to the heights of possible well-being, and the valleys correspond to the lowest depths of misery. And one thing to drop out of this model, which I call a moral landscape, is that clearly there could be many peaks. There may be many different and therefore incompatible ways for human communities to thrive. Now, why isn't this a problem? Well, there's still going to be right and wrong ways to get to these peaks. And there are going to be many more ways to not be on a peak. And it's clearly possible to be mistaken about whether you're headed up or down in this space. Now, why aren't multiple peaks a problem? Consider by analogy food. I would never be tempted to argue that there's one right food to eat. Clearly, there are many questions. There are many answers to the question, what is food? But the difference between food and poison is still biologically salient at every turn, and we can understand it in terms of science. And we can understand every caveat here. We can understand that some people are allergic to peanuts and will die if they eat them. I mean, that is not something that confounds us.
I'm going to kill myself.
The difference between food and poison. Now, there's also the fact that certain principles may work in navigating this space, but not always work. And is that a problem? So people think that if there's such a thing as moral truth, if, for instance, it's wrong to lie, well, it's always got to be wrong to lie. And if you can find a single exception, well, then there's no such thing as moral truth. But notice, a game like chess, this is really the prototypical space of objective right and wrong answers. A principle like don't lose your queen is very good to follow if you're going to play good chess. It's almost always good to follow. And yet, it admits of countless exceptions. There are moments where losing your queen is a brilliant thing to do. There are moments where it's the only thing you can do. never for a moment do we see those exceptions and think, well, then there's just no right answer to playing a winning game of chess. Now, this notion of a moral landscape also admits of the possibility of what people traditionally call spiritual or mystical experience. I think it's quite clear that human beings have these experiences available to them.
I love this video, but there is nothing insightful in it for me.
And some of them can be really hard won. Some of them can take a lot of training to find. And some people may not be capable of having certain very positive experiences. I've actually been in the habit of saying that undoubtedly there's a Tiger Woods of compassion out there somewhere. For various reasons, that analogy doesn't quite run through at the moment. But perhaps you take the point. Compassion can really appropriately be thought of as a skill. It's trainable to some degree. It's not evenly distributed in the population. And basically everything else that redounds to our mutual well-being is trainable to some degree. An ability to regulate your own negative emotions, to be aware of the emotions of other people. They're clearly answers to the question of how we could raise children to be
I'm tired of saying that already.
Or to be able to defer short-term gratification in the service of a longer-term goal. How many of you recognize this photograph? This is a photograph of apparently happy Nazis. This comes from what's now called the Auschwitz album, which is a photo album that was discovered in someone's attic, I believe, relatively recently. Totally unmarked photos of Nazis listening to accordion music and eating blueberries and lying in the sun. And it turns out this was the staff at Auschwitz really during its peak as a machine of death. And this was at a chalet that was kind of 10 kilometers, I think, from the death camp. And this is more or less what people were doing beneath the plume of human ash coming out of the crematory at Auschwitz. Now, there's nothing about my view of morality and its link to well-being that forces me to deny that these people could be happy to some degree. And I think these are real smiles. I don't think they're faking for the camera. And I don't think these are psychopaths. I think most members of the SS, even those intimately involved in
neurotypicals are psychopaths.
Genocide.
Because they're fucking stupid.
For people who love their kids and love their pets and went home and listened to Wagner and shed a tear. And this is there's the problem we confront here is that these are people who had bounded their moral universe so tightly as to put much of humanity outside it. The challenge for all of us is to find ways of
oh my God!
Our moral concern to all of humanity. So we're not, for the most part, confronting people who have radically different notions of what morality is. We're confronting people who have some ideology that draws the boundary between themselves and people who don't count.
I should quit my life once this level is done.
Now, I want to look specifically at religion and why it's not a good compass for moral values. I want to look first at Islam, because I think we are misled in our discussion about it. We're misled by the fact that we have this one word, religion. Okay, religion is a word like sports. Some of you have probably heard me say this. It's a suitcase term that is not very useful and confuses
kind
a
of
lot
true.
Of people. There are sports
That's
like
a good thought.
badminton, and there are sports like Thai boxing.
I'm going to.
And they have basically nothing in common apart from breathing. Some sports are synonymous with risk of physical injury or death. If you get hurt playing badminton, that's just embarrassing. Now, there is a religion of peace in this world. Unfortunately, it's not Islam. Jainism is a genuine religion of peace. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about. Right.
Gandhi wasn't a perfect person by any means, though. I want you to remember that.
So religious extremism is not the problem. When we talk about extremism, that is a euphemism for the problem. And so too with fundamentalism. The Islamic fundamentalism is only a problem because the fundamentals of Islam are a problem. So I want to get into these details a little bit because I think we have to focus on the behavioral and logical consequences of specific beliefs. Now, what do these three men specifically believe? Well, in case you don't know, that's Mullah Omar on the left, head of the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed on the right. Now, these guys, whatever disagreements they may have politically or socially, they agree about the nature of reality and how to live within it. I think they probably agree in their core concerns more than any three people in this room. And that's not an accident. I mean, they are on the same page because they're literally drawing their worldview from a book. And it's a very short book. I mean, the Quran is not like the Bible. It's not, I invite you all to sit down and read it. It'll take you 10 hours, maybe. The Bible will take you 6 weeks to read, cover to cover, as your full-time job. But the Quran is a very unified message. And so it can't be cherry-picked in the same way the Bible can. So comparisons between the bad parts of the Quran and Leviticus and Deuteronomy in the Bible are rather often just simply dishonest. You can cherry-pick, if you're a Christian, for instance, you can cherry-pick the New Testament and ignore much of the Old Testament and come away with a truly benign religion. You know, Jesus is a hippie who got crucified and just preaching love. Okay, that is a plausible version of Christianity at this point in human history. You can't do that with the Quran. The Quran gives you, and the
really, Quran is small.
The commentarial tradition around it is in fact worse than the Quran.
We should do that.
So it's
to have fun.
The problem is these guys are presenting a very plausible version of Islam. Now, please notice, if they were Quakers or Jains or Buddhists or Amish, it would be absolutely clear where they were going wrong. In fact, their behavior would be unintelligible. It is all too intelligible by the light of Islam. The principal message of Islam is that the infidels are fit only for the fires of hell, and that there is absolutely nothing better for you to do in this life than to die in defense of the one true faith, and spread this faith by conversion or the sword to the ends of the earth. And this is a fact that awaits the scrutiny of anyone who actually wants to read this literature. And the belief is that the Quran was dictated to Muhammad in his cave by the Archangel Gabriel in the 7th century. I apologize for the cartoonish nature of this image.
7th century. You mean Islam is so young?
As you might imagine, quality images of Muhammad are difficult to come by at the moment. But the net result is that we now have a book that is believed to be the perfect word of the creator of the universe, never to be superseded by anything else we do now or at any point in the future. It's supposed to be the best book on any subject ever written, and that's going to stand for all time. Now, the problem with this is it really isn't the best book on any subject. It is a profoundly mediocre book. And there's a kind of fantastical intellectual isolation that
I'm so
walls
miserable.
off this claim from real criticism. For instance, the Arab world has translated less of the world's literature and learning into Arabic since the 9th century than the country of Spain translates every year. And the Arab world is only 25% of the Muslim world, but it is most of Islam as doctrine. The Arabs control the mosques throughout the world and fund all of the teaching, all of the madrasas. So this isolation from the rest of the human conversation is a problem. And the net result of this doctrine is that what you should do with your life is live in perpetual supplication to this invisible deity that has given us this perfect book and defend this faith from all critics. And these are Muslims in Kashmir worshiping at a shrine believed to contain a single beard hair from the Prophet Muhammad. Now, in showing you this photo, I certainly don't mean to make light of the suffering of Muslims in Kashmir. Undoubtedly, life is hard for Muslims in Kashmir. And I actually don't mean to denigrate the positive states of mind that could come from this very behavior. And I think devotion is a positive state of mind, and awe, and there are positive correlates to even religious fanaticism. But it seems to me patently obvious that given all of the challenges that face human beings at this moment in history, all of the need to build a thriving civil society at the global level, these people have more important things to do than worship the beard hair of a man who could well have been a schizophrenic. And the net result of this belief system is inescapably that women are secondary. Now, the net result is not necessarily every woman has to wear a full burqa. That's not spelled out. But this is all too understandable given what is spelled out. But women are the property of the men in their lives. This is something we have to stop lying about, and we actually have to confront. Because nobody is suffering under this ideology more than women in the Muslim world. And also, we get the result that we are now all too familiar with of a death cult that has managed to rationalize what should be truly unthinkable behavior in suicide bombing. Now, no, it's not the only source of suicide bombing in human history. It's possible to find a rationale to blow yourself up by some other ideology. That's true. But this is a scene that's created on a daily basis in the Muslim world, and it's often created in a context that has absolutely nothing to do with U.S. foreign policy or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This is a image from a suicide bombing in Pakistan where Sunni blew up Shia pilgrims. The Sunni consider Shia to be apostates. They regularly blow up their mosques, and they blow up Sufi mosques and Ahmadi mosques. This is Muslim-on-Muslim violence that has an explicitly theological purpose. And yes, we produce collateral damage when we wage war and we create things like this, but this is not collateral damage. This is the point. I actually want to linger on these details because we rarely do. I've spared you some ghastly details in this image, but this is a little girl crouched over the body of her dead mother. And this is actually not the original bombing. What happened is the Sunni bombed a procession of Shia, but then they sent another suicide bomb.
I want to die. I want to die.
The doctors and the nurses when the ambulance arrived. I mean, just imagine that. Someone first had to think of that idea. It was kind of diabolically creative. But then someone had to volunteer to do it. Now, there are many Western scholars who look at this and do backflips in an attempt to find some way of explaining this behavior beyond religion. You have people like Robert Pape and Scott Atran who say, well, this is all politics. got nothing to do with religion. Literally, I meet anthropologists who think that literally no one believes in paradise. No one has ever blown himself up thinking he was going to get to some afterlife. But whatever you believe about the rationale here, I think it should be clear that this is smallpox for the mind. I mean, there's nothing good here. And to say that we can't criticize this from the point of view of science is tantamount to saying, well, we know absolutely nothing about human well-being, and we will never know.
I'm going to die.
It's tantamount to saying, well, we've got 150 years of psychology and neuroscience and sociology behind us, and we've made really impressive gains in our treatment of women and our civil society, but I don't know, maybe blowing up this girl's mom and everything around, maybe that's as good as anything we've come up with. It's not intellectually honest, and it is a rather obvious failure of compassion. Now, just so you don't get the idea that I'm narrowly focused on Islam, I'd point out that the moment you see the link between questions of right and wrong and good and evil and the flourishing of conscious creatures, then it becomes clear when people are actually not talking about morality, though they say they are. So, for instance, the Catholic Church simply is more concerned about preventing contraception than about preventing the rape of children. I mean, that is a fact based on its actions and based on its doctrine. It's more concerned about preventing gay marriage than genocide. And now, again, when you see that you have to, in order to be speaking morally, you have to have some concern for the details of human suffering, then you can see that this is not a moral position we have to take seriously. I mean, the Catholic Church could talk about physics. It could say, well, we're very interested in the physics of the transubstantiation, or the physics that allows the Holy Ghost to be here and there and everywhere at once. But there is not a physicist alive who would have to take that talk seriously. I'm saying the same move is open to us on the subject of morality and values. I mean, in science, we define our terms very much to the detriment of homeopathy and astrology and Christian Science and every other branch of human ignorance. So, I want to remind you of a few more reasons why we don't get we can't be getting our morality out of religion.
Fuck.
I know this could be obvious to everyone in this room, but it's useful to have these arguments at the ready. The first thing to notice is that you go to the holy books, you have to edit them. I mean, there's not a fundamentalist Christian or Orthodox Jew anywhere who can read Deuteronomy and take it all seriously. So when we go to the books and we say, aha, this is really the wisdom of God, something like the Golden Rule.
Incredible.
And when we ignore the fact that if a girl is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to take her to her father's doorstep and stone her to death.
I hate religious cooks.
We are bowdlerizing. We are the guarantors of the wisdom, such as it is, that we find in Scripture. And that is, so that proves, I mean, end of argument, it proves that we are getting our deepest moral commitments from a larger conversation. And there's also the fact that the world's religions are in conflict with one another. I mean, they are irreconcilable. And when you look at this is a map of the way religious commitment is partitioned over the Earth's surface. This is an example I've actually gotten from Richard Dawkins. If you take one look at this map, you can see that this religion is not in the truth business. I mean, this is not how knowledge spreads. There's no reason for true belief to hug political and national borders in this way. I mean, just take India as an example. Does anyone think that the people who by accident were born in India, of all the Earth's peoples, have discovered that the elephant-head Ganesh actually exists and should be propitiated? I mean, I don't even think Hindus can believe that at this point. This is just not the way discoveries about the nature of our universe spread. And forget about the contradictions between religions. There are impressive patterns of contradiction within each faith. This is a map of contradictions within the Bible, and each one of these red arcs links two verses that are really deal breakers. I mean, these are moments where the Bible is just self-refuting. John the Baptist was in jail when Jesus was crucified. John the Baptist was not in jail when Jesus was crucified. And the gray bars, which you can almost see, are the numbers of verses implicated in each book. There's also the inconvenient fact that the most abhorrent human behaviors are actually sanctioned in these holy books. And this also should just end the argument about whether the Bible and the Quran are the perfect word of the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe gets the question of slavery wrong. The God of Abraham clearly expects us to keep slaves. Jefferson Davis was absolutely right to say that theology was on the side of the slaveholders during the Civil War. Slavery is the easiest moral question we've ever had to solve. If the Bible
and that
had been written by an
still took so much time.
Deity, there'd be a clear prohibition against owning people and treating them like farm equipment. Now, I want to move on to some of the issues that people find in thinking about moral truth.
I'm going
One of them is
to
this notion
hurt
that
myself.
our moral intuitions can be confounded. And the fact that our moral intuitions can be pushed around suggests to people that, well, there really can't be any such thing as moral truth. And this is an example many of you are probably familiar with, called the trolley problem. You have a trolley coming down the tracks, and if you do nothing, it's going to hit and kill 5 workmen. But you stand at a switch, and you can throw the switch, thereby diverting the trolley onto another track where it will only kill 1 workman, and so you'll save a net 4 lives. Now, presented this way, something like 95% of people think, well, you absolutely have to throw that switch. You would be a monster not to throw it.
And 1% of the ontologists thinks that no.
But the problem is, it can be described in another way. Now you're standing on a footbridge, and the train is hurtling down the track, destined to kill 5 workmen. But beside you on the bridge is a suitably large gentleman who you can push into the path of the oncoming trolley, thereby stopping it, killing him, of course, but saving a net 4 lives. Now, when you describe it this way, the response completely flips, and something like 95% of people think, oh, you would be a monster to push that man. Now,
people are so
I happen to think
dumb.
this question is ill-posed. I think many of us have an intuitive sense of physics, and we burn a lot of fuel wondering whether he's really going to stop the trolley when you push him. But even if you stipulate that these are the
I'm
same,
going to
the net result is the same in terms of body count.
For all my sins.
There may in fact be a difference. Just if you're going to wake up with nightmares for the rest of your life having pushed someone up close and personal, but will feel like a hero for having thrown a switch, well, then maybe there is actually a difference in the consequences of certain kinds of violence and
I thought it was that
casualty. And therefore, if you're actually going to talk about the effects of these events, you have to have a broader picture of their consequences. But whatever the right answer is here, the fact that our moral intuitions are pushed around by the framing of these kinds of questions shouldn't give us the sense that there's no such thing as moral truth. There's no such thing as a right answer to what is going to maximize human well-being. Notice we don't get confounded in this way with logical problems. This is the Monty Hall problem. How many of you are familiar with the Monty Hall problem? How many of you are sure you know the right answer to the Monty Hall problem? Okay, this is Caltech. So you be quiet. You're on a game show and you have 3 doors, right? Behind one door is a new car, and behind the other 2 are goats. And if you pick the right door, you win the new car. So you pick door number 1, and then Monty Hall opens door number 2, revealing a goat. The question at this moment is, should you switch to door number 3? He gives you an opportunity to switch. How many of you think you should switch? How many of you think it doesn't matter if you switch? Okay, well, there's
I missed the fucking
strong
question.
Intuition in many people, even many very smart people, mathematicians, people who understand, are familiar with the Monty Hall problem. How many of you are sure you know the right answer to the Monty Hall problem? Okay, this is Caltech. So you be quiet. You're on a game show and you have 3 doors, right? Behind one door is a new car, and behind the other 2 are goats. And if you pick the right door, you win the new car. So you pick door number 1, and then Monty Hall opens door number 2, revealing a goat. The question at this moment is, should you switch to door number 3? He gives you an opportunity to switch. How many of you think you should switch?
There's no way that matters. Let me think. There is no way that matters. If it does, I'm disappointed in myself once more.
How many of you think it doesn't matter if you switch? Okay, well, there's a kind of strong intuition in many people, even many very smart people, mathematicians, people who understand probability theory, that there's no reason to switch. You got 2 doors, you got a car behind one, a goat behind another. This is a coin toss. Why would you switch? Okay, now it turns out you should switch. Your chances actually double if you switch. Your chances are 1/3 if you stick with your original choice, and they go up to 2/3. If you switch to door number 3.
Really? Why?
But the point is that even people who understand this probabilistically, can get lulled back into thinking, well, wait a minute. There's a car, there's a goat. Why would I switch?
There's no way.
Incidentally, it's actually easier to see if you imagine 1,000 doors at the initial moment of choice, and then Monty Hall nullifies 998 of them, leaving your door number 1 and then door 576. Then it's pretty obvious you've been given a ton of information, and switching to door 576 would make sense.
Why?
In any case, we don't leave the Monty Hall problem thinking, well, there's no such thing as logical truth. Maybe there's no right answer to the Monty Hall problem. And we don't do it with basic perceptual illusions. Anyone who can actually see these images clearly in this room will see the right-hand tower leaning further to the right than the tower on the left. Now, these are in fact the same image. This is a very reliable visual illusion, which actually tells us something about our visual system. But again, no one moves from the reliable production of visual illusions to the conclusion that, well, maybe there's just no ground truth here to the geometry of the physical world. And clearly we have moral illusions. This is from work by Paul Slovic, who's a psychologist, who's asked groups of people, how much would you give to help a little girl named Rokia in need? She's hungry, she needs an education. What would you do to help her? If you ask people this question, you get a maximum donation, or they're going to give as much as they're going to give to anything, and you get a maximum report of empathy. Okay? And so too, if you ask people, how much would you give to help a little boy in need, you get the same result. But if you ask groups, how much would you give to help a little boy and a little girl, in need, self-reported compassion and actual material donation dropped by 25%. This is clearly non-normative. I mean, this is a bug, not a feature. I mean, if you care about the fate of a little girl and you care about the fate of a little boy, you should care at least as much about their combined fate. And as you might expect, the more kids you
less
add,
emotional attachment.
the more you see this trend toward callousness.
Makes sense.
Just compassion and actual donations go through the floor.
Fuck me.
Now this, to Slovik's mind, explains what he calls genocide neglect, which is something that many of us have noticed. Genocides are boring. I mean, we actually don't want to pay attention to them. We don't naturally pay attention
Want to die.
If they even make the
That's
news,
only 58 minutes. I've been sitting here for eternity. What? I already wanted to quit.
When a little girl falls down a well, I don't know if you recognize that, but that's from 1989. Baby Jessica fell down a well. Everyone with a television on Earth was just glued to it to find out what was going to happen to this little girl. And yet, 800,000 people can be hacked to death, many of them children, in Rwanda in 2 months, and we really don't have the free attentional resources.
I'm so tired of existing.
This is something we have to. This is something that scientifically we can discover about ourselves, but it's something we have to correct for. We have to clearly engineer our better selves into our laws and our tax codes and our social institutions to protect ourselves from our moment-to-moment failures of moral intuition. But we're simply not disposed to care about the greatest swings in human well-being, it would seem. So, to conclude, I've argued that questions of right and wrong and good and evil relate to questions of human and animal well-being. And clearly, the moment you would concede that, if in fact you do, then these questions fall within our growing scientific understanding of the human mind and everything that can possibly influence it. And therefore, these questions have to have right and wrong answers. And the moment you admit that, you have to admit that certain individuals and subcultures, and even whole cultures, potentially, care about the wrong things. Which is to say, they care about things that will reliably produce needless human misery. And they care about things that will foreclose certain possibilities of human cooperation and happiness. And it seems to me the challenge for us at this moment, really the greatest challenge, is to find a way of talking about human values that allows us to converge as a single species on the kinds of answers we give to the most important questions in human life. To converge on the same economic and environmental and social and political goals. And to do that, I think that the necessary precursor is to admit that these questions fall onto a landscape and admit of right and wrong answers. Thank you very much.
Stop with that noise.
Managed to do an entire Q&A with Richard Dawkins without one speech being given at the microphones. Everybody was very disciplined in getting straight to the point, keep the questions short, and then Sam will answer them. Let's start with you right here, sir.
Are we mic'd now? Sorry. Regarding Islam, Sam, I'm generally very impressed with the clarity of your argument, so I wanted to ask you about an instance where I thought that clarity is not on display.
Sure.
And that was in your conversation with Reza Aslan regarding the so-called Ground Zero Mosque.
Right.
And your point seemed to be that while we should certainly not forbid the construction, we should be somewhat vaguely worried about it. And it seemed that the tenor of those comments were somewhat similar to the ones that got Juan Williams fired from NPR. So I was wondering, So I was wondering, how badly did I miss your point? And secondly, do you have any thoughts on Juan Williams' termination?
Right. Good question. Well, my point in that conversation, and my point
all of it is
in
order.
all subsequent conversations about Islam, is that a criticism of the doctrine of Islam is not synonymous with bigotry. Now, there are bigots who are worried about Islam for bad reasons. You know, there are racists, and there are people who are, you know, ready for the rapture and are just sure Islam is a satanic religion, and it's inconvenient to be temporarily aligned with them in my whenever I open my mouth against Islam. But what worries me is that only our own religious demagogues actually make sense when they talk about Islam. I mean, the guy who's going to burn the Quran was making more sense than Mayor Bloomberg on Islam. And Mayor Bloomberg stands up and says 9/11 had nothing to do with Islam. Islam's a religion of peace. So that's a lie. Now there are situations in which it may be practical to lie in precisely that way. And you know, I obviously can't give this talk in Pakistan or in you know, Mecca, and so people have to go to Pakistan and Mecca to talk sense. Can't really you know, connect all the dots on this subject. But the issue is that many apologists for Islam are simply playing hide the ball with the articles of faith. They're lying. They either, Reza is not an example. Reza is just someone who actually thinks not being honest. But there's some people who just, we're so desperate to believe that this is a problem of our own making, entirely of our own making, and we just have to modify our behavior and the problem's going to go away. And there's a lot of white guilt and an understandable debt we feel we have to repay to much of the world for our history of colonialism and xenophobia and racism and slavery and everything else that we're right to want to atone for. But we have to be honest about the actual consequences of specific beliefs, and we have to be absolutely clear that talking about those beliefs
this is the transition of all
time.
time.
Being a racist. When I'm talking about Islam, I'm not talking about nationalities, I'm not talking about Arabs, I'm talking about ideas. Everything I say about Islam applies to the white guy who wakes up tomorrow morning, you know, like John Walker Lind or Adam Gadon, and you know, thinks he should join
You can die.
the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. I mean, so it's ideas we're talking about. And people like Reza are very cagey in pulling the levers of guilt and political correctness so as to just make every criticism of Islam seem like it's bigotry, and it's not. I just don't think it's serving anyone.
What do you feel is the relationship between Eric Hoffer's concept of the true believer to the problem of establishing ethical consensus?
Well,
What's wrong with this shit?
There are ways of establishing consensus that we should be worried about. I mean, we don't want cult-like dogmatism.
That's not even a spike. It looks like a spike.
Cult-like dogmatism. The reason why religion is so problematic is that the inability to question bad ideas is the basis, is the foundation of faith-based thinking. The ultimate example of this that many of us remember is when it came out that Mother Teresa had actually lost her faith. You know, she had gone to her confessor and said, you know, I don't believe that, I worry that God doesn't exist. I forget her actual wording, but she was clearly someone who had lost her faith to a significant degree. And he turned that back on her as proof of the faith, essentially. He said, well, this just proves that you're suffering Christ's passion on the cross.
What?
And so I said at that time, well, this is wonderful. You know, just when the doubts of experts can be used as evidence to prove the doctrine, well, then how could you ever change your mind? And that's something that we need to worry about. But the consensus, I think I hear behind your question a concern that if we all converge on sort of the same ethical beliefs, that there's a kind of Orwellian or kind of Brave New World overreach there that's possible for us.
Well, the concept of the true believer being people abandoning self-worth, self-volition, and responsibility and happiness, those are all correlated.
Oh, you're worried about individual versus collective well-being?
Yeah, because with the concept of the true believer, which we see in religion, we have this abandon of self-worth, self-responsibility, and connection to being human, being moral, being ethical. So I'm wondering how this ties into the moral landscape in your opinion, in your view from the book.
Right. Well, there's clearly a tension between individual well-being and collective well-being at certain moments. And there may be, and again, there could be many different peaks on the landscape, and there could be a peak in which we really get over our self-concern to a degree that would be just astonishing to all of us, and that's the way of maximizing well-being. But there could be a peak where
this transition
the
is the worst shit ever.
For oneself and one's family, say, is actually compatible with being on a peak. I mean, because we recognize that there are instances where it's just obviously the way we're wired to care more about our own kids, say, in certain circumstances. But it's also obvious that submitting to a system, a larger social system that's not going to recognize those biases, where an example I use in my book is you go to the hospital emergency room, you care about your daughter more than any other kid in the room, perhaps, but you don't expect the hospital to care more about your daughter than any other kid in the room. And in fact, it would be a little creepy if the doctors came up and said, "Well, we only care about your daughter." And the truth is, my well-being and the well-being of my daughter is going to tend to be maximized in a fair system, I think, more than a one that's strangely biased or corrupt or easily corrupted, where you can bribe the doctor at every turn, because there's so many more ways for that system to go against a corrupt system to go against me. So I think I'm acknowledging that there can be a trade-off between individual and collective, but the optimum tuning of it, there's clearly ways for it to be tuned better or worse.
I really like in your argument that you include non-human animals, which I think is so often missing from humanism, even in the term humanism.
I forgot.
And I was wondering what you think the implications are for the systemic use of non-human animals for seemingly human wounds.
Well, I think we should be concerned about it to the degree that the animals we're talking about have an experience. And so it's clearly I part company with the people who think that all species are equal. I mean, there's no reason to think that. Because then you should just be adding rocks to that. And if you're just going to be scrupulous and not caring about the details of experience, then I don't know what you really care about. But it's clearly, insofar as we can reasonably understand that.
Oh my god, the transition is so fucking random.
I think we have an ethical obligation to treat animals as well as we can. And so, if you can use a mouse in research and not a chimp, you should absolutely use the mouse. And so, I think our intuitions can be confounded to some degree because we like cute animals more than not cute. So, like the fluffy tail of a squirrel gets it off, whereas a rat is less cute. And I think there are places to stand in science where we can say, well, we really shouldn't be apportioning our ethical concern based on the fluffiness of the tail. But I think our concern should scale with the complexity of brains, because we have every reason to believe that the brain is what's important there.
This is...
concerning the issue that you confronted towards the end of the lecture,
where am I playing from?
Ability and the way they devote more resources to a smaller amount of children, do you think that has something to do with the fact that people think, we can't save the world? It's easier to help one child than to help 50.
Yeah, well, that I think is part of what's going on. And the other phrase that Slovic uses is psychic numbing. It's just too overwhelming to actually be totally permeable to the enormity of the inequities in the world. It's hard to even operate under the shadow of that fact. So, but that's why the most important moral moves for us to make are not personal, and they're really not whether each of us on a daily basis or a weekly basis or every year open the appeal from UNICEF and say, all right, I'm going to write a bigger check than I normally do because I get it. The biggest moves are at the level of society. I mean, we need governments to make the right decisions, and we need to create systems of collective behavior and economic incentives that really are aligned with our better judgment, to make it easier to, it's like, you know, there's 90,000 homeless people in Los Angeles. How should we help them? Well, it's not a matter of each of us just finally deciding, all right, I'm going to give $1 every time I meet a homeless person. There's got to be a, you know...
Oh my god, alright, this shit sucks! This is broken.
The collective.
What do you think about tolerance? Because I think we've been sort of educated, it's in my lifetime, to believe in the virtue of tolerance, which has somehow gotten transmuted into indifference and ignorance.
Yeah, well, it's tolerance.
This shit does not work! Oh my god, 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 what do I do, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do? If this shit does not fucking work.
Colleagues on the left, and I consider myself a liberal on every relevant point, but when I read a Nicholas Kristof article where he is sanctimoniously condemning someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I don't know if you know Ayaan, but Ayaan is an absolute hero of the 21st century. She's a Somali woman who escaped.
Alright, those are all buffers.
Circumcised, as 98% of Somali women are. The word circumcision should be noticeable as a euphemism to you. I mean, this is totally unanalogous to male circumcision. So female genital mutilation is the way you should think about it. She escaped an arranged marriage, got off the plane in Frankfurt, went to Holland, learned Dutch, got a college education.
This is disgusting. This transition, you deserve being fucking killed for such transitions.
It's a truly horrid treatment of women in the immigrant communities in Holland, Muslim immigrant communities, and has lived with continuous death threats ever since. And she is criticized by liberals in this country, people like Nicholas Kristof, for being a bigot whenever she criticizes.
Oh, this is the only fucking choke point.
That kind of, to place your sympathies with the mullahs and not with the women in this case, it just seems like a real pathology of political correctness. And so, yeah, tolerance is not an objective, it's not a universal good, obviously. I mean, tolerance of intolerance is cowardice.
Yeah, in education. Tolerance seems to be what is being taught, almost preached.
What? You can die like that? Oh, that's just laughable. This fact is laughable, oh my god.
It's clearly good, and it's what good people, well-intentioned people are going to be like 99% of the time. You sort of were disposed to sort of give everyone the benefit of the doubt and to be polite and to not call attention to differences between people. And I think that's all to the good in an open society almost all the time, except when you have people who are perversely taking advantage of it. And
oh no, one frame. Alright, 10 frames actually about.
Cartoonists to be killed for drawing cartoons of the prophet are people who we actually have to worry about, and we have to talk on them. So the response to that issue cannot be banning the cartoons from every magazine in the United States, as was done here, and a refusal to show them any. I mean, these were utterly benign cartoons. So, I mean, tolerance is one thing. I think free speech basically has to win when in doubt.
Doesn't the NPR Juan Williams thing sort of come in here where we want?
Yeah. Well, I think it was not a good moment for NPR.
What? Oh my god, I'm disgusting. Do I need to practice? Let's do it really quickly.
If someone gets on looking exactly like Osama bin Laden and he's got a wife wearing a niqab, it's only rational to be concerned. I mean, because think of what a statement that is in the post 9/11 world. Think of what a statement a person. It is a clear statement of ideology, an ideology which is if not an actual risk, enabling a massive risk. so I didn't actually hear. I just heard reports about what he said. But if he's talking about being a little freaked out when someone gets on in a full veil, especially knowing that the political correctness of the rest of our security apparatus is going to by no means guarantee that this person was actually searched adequately. I mean that's I've seen that. If we've got $10 worth of security attention to pay at the airport, and we lavish it equally on everyone, it would seem. The idea that you have no information about a person who's walking through in a burqa is delusional. And the first people to talk about that honestly should be moderate Muslims. I mean, it's like,
that's so unlucky.
It has to be their conversation.
Okay, well,
okay.
Alright, to continue the tolerance in Islam kick, apparently. I come from a Muslim family. I'm not myself, obviously. But I have relatives who are so deeply entrenched in it. Women who claim to, of their own accord, cover their faces, and at 18 get married, turn into baby-making machines, they're done with life. What do you do about that? Because, we're talking about, it's not right to treat women this way, or it's not right to do things this way. What about people who assimilate those values themselves to the point where they're so blind that they...
Oh, so you can die also like that. Oh my god, it's just incredible. Oh, what is wrong with you?
I heard for the last question are confused by this variable here. The fact that you can prop up dozens or hundreds or even tens of thousands of women in full veil, and they'll say, this is how I want to live. We shouldn't be confused by that, and here's why. First of all, when you're interviewing a woman in a burqa, you're invariably interviewing a woman in the presence of her husband in Afghanistan, say. But women making this life choice are making it in the context of a culture where they will be treated certain ways if they don't behave this way. And so, I mean, the clear case is, if you're in Somalia and you have a daughter, should you 98% of girls are.
That's Ruder reference.
Is this an ethical dilemma? Well, outside of Somalia, clearly not. This is just completely pathological and just it's objectively bad thing to do to little girls. But what's going to happen to you as someone who can't get out of Somalia, who has a daughter who's now not circumcised, and what's going to happen to her over the course of her life? Well, then within the context, it seems to present some kind of ethical problem. But what I'm saying is that we can stand outside the context and see the whole context as pathological and something that we have to changing.
Whatever.
And yeah, we have to find some way of empowering, in this case, the women of the Muslim world, and getting them to want genuine freedom. I mean, I'm not arguing for laws passed against. I mean, I don't think that the burqa ban in France is necessarily the right way to go about this. In general, I think laws are the wrong way to. The law against Holocaust denial in Germany, I think, is idiotic. I mean, that's not the lever you need to pull to deal with those bad ideas.
Funny.
But it's a real conundrum how we empower Muslim women. I think having our liberals criticize someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali is truly the wrong answer. I mean, Ayaan is just the symbol of everything that
this is kind of hard demonish.
We should be emulating.
Mr. Harris, I'd like to compliment you on your wonderful development of utilitarianism and John Stuart's moral theory of the greatest good for the greatest number, and your enlightenment to development in a sense, on a scientific basis.
The same shit again. This is so funny.
Tradition there.
This is just, there's nothing more. Wait, didn't Ryder die like that too? I'm not sure.
Conundrum, if you like, that you've mentioned a few times, and the philosophy that you're espousing here. And my question is this: if it turns out that people like B.F. Skinner and other behaviorists are right, and the quote mind turns out to be little more than a conversation, in effect, that we have with ourselves, then it turns out in the end to be quietly talking to ourselves as an internalization of what we learned when we were very young, which is externally talking out loud. And it turns out that thinking is this internalization or this learning to talk to oneself ever more quietly to the point where we are today, where we can quote unquote think as an adaptation, obviously, to the environment. It turns out that these people are correct in that analysis, and the mind as we traditionally know it doesn't exist as they say, in the sense that they mean it. Does that do anything to affect or impact your concept that we care about how the mind is hurt or suffering in terms of your overall analysis?
Right. Okay. Well, I think there's no reason to think that the behaviorists and B.F. Skinner were right in any deep sense. And clearly, what you're talking about as mind is just part of mind. I mean, the discursive thought is a conversation we're having with ourselves, and it's arguably a conversation that's kind of got trained up in childhood through talking to other people. But that's not the totality of mind. That certainly doesn't explain consciousness. It doesn't. It's not the entirety of our emotional life at all. So, when someone is experiencing joy or love or compassion or depression or any kind of strongly qualitative mental state, it's not just a matter of the thoughts. Now, the thoughts can play a significant role in being engines of emotion, and emotion can color thought, and there's sort of a virtuous or vicious cycle there that can be built up. But there's nothing about to the contrary. I think the contents of consciousness and consciousness are, whatever their status with regard to the brain and the rest of the physical world, are the only things that can be cared about, really. And everything else that we can care about, like beautiful landscapes and clean water and the fate of the planet, etc., can be cared about because there's consciousness in this universe, and it's possible to experience or changes in rocks, and so it's I don't think whatever the status of the mind is, it is what's important, and if it continued after death, that would be really important to know, and so I don't know if I get to your question, but Skinner's not the final word on anything, as far as I can tell.
Overly reductionistic representation of behavior.
Well, I don't think it's reductionistic in that you never get rid of the subjective component. For instance, if we're going to be mapping the mind for many decades to come, hopefully, if we don't.
Fuck.
We'll be correlating.
I never died like that in my life. Do you know that? This is in your best.
Our inner lives, but the correlation never gets rid of the subjectivity. It's only a successful correlation if it's actually reliably correlated. And I'm not a reductionist in the sense that I think we're at some point going to get to, we're only going to talk about neurotransmitters and never talk about how we feel. I think the neurotransmitters only explain how we feel because they're reliably correlated with how we feel. But the fact that the lights are on in a first-person sense is still the thing that's important. And I don't think we're ever going to lose that.
Hi, Sam. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
I want to ask you what you may find to be kind of a strange question, and if you've addressed it in your new book, which I haven't finished reading yet, I apologize. But it seems to me like we have secularists who think that there is truth which exists, including about
My
values.
mistake.
And we have a lot of people in the middle with a variety of beliefs who generally think that you can't make objective truth statements about values. And then on the other hand, we have religious fundamentalists who do think that truth exists.
Right.
They have a terrible epistemology, obviously. But do you think that it is at all useful, or it can be useful in some strategic way, to involve these people in the conversation? Because this is something very important we agree with them about, that truth exists.
Well, that's what worries me. I mean, that's not an alliance I'm eager to form for obvious reasons. Because
I don't understand
the level. Rapture all the good people. But I've had to talk to those people when things. To come back to Ayan, because she's such a clear light to shine onto this situation. When Ayaan Hirsi Ali lost her security, her protection from the Dutch government,
I just never used the right fucking click pattern. I'm so dumb. I could have beaten the level already if only I knew the click pattern. But my G factor is insufficient.
And at that point, I actually went out to Rick Warren and Christian fundamentalists who could see the problem. You know, you go to raise Aslan on that, and it's not a fun conversation. And it seemed to me the first people who should have recognized the value of Ayaan and the need to protect her should have been moderate Muslims and liberals more generally, and that was not the case. So there is a especially vis-a-vis our conflict with Islam and the
this is so easy.
Theocratic and intolerant forces in the community.
The second time from zero, and the second time in my life, in general, in total, basically.
Our own religious demagogues, and that is not a status quo any of us should be happy about.
Wrong
I'm
pattern.
wondering how what you're advocating differs from the general school of utilitarian thinking.
Well, I avoid, as you can tell, the categories of utilitarianism versus deontology versus virtue ethics. I think that way of carving up the pie is not so useful. And I think my argument, while it is consequentialist, I'm concerned about the consequences for the well-being of conscious creatures, it's not open to some of the conventional challenges that are leveled against utilitarianism. Because clearly, utilitarianism, as historically presented, can seem to ignore much of what clearly is a value. So, if you're focused narrowly on short-term pleasure or happiness, well, then what about things like justice and fairness and having a clear conscience? And you know, why not just take heroin all day? And if it's just about a pleasant mind state, you know, we've got drugs that can do that. But that clearly ignores a larger picture of what is important to us and what is going to be necessary for human flourishing. A civilization of heroin addicts is not likely to be a peak on the moral landscape. So, I am a consequentialist in some sense, and I think consequentialism does win, but you have to get out of the traditional bins, I think, in which you think about these things. Okay.
All right, hopefully this will be rather brief.
I thought it was that long ago.
What the scientific and I guess in philosophical circles, the reactions of those individuals were to your arguably brief refutation of Hume.
Of Hume?
In your new book, yes.
Well, you know, there's been a fair amount of pushback, not so much from scientists, but from that I've noticed from scientists, but from some philosophers who felt I just hadn't given philosophy its due, and that's somewhat. I mean, I expected that, and I wrote an end note sort of anticipating that, but I just think it's if you want to have the conversation in a way that reaches
I cannot
people
believe this.
and makes some kind of difference.
I died to this ship like 10 times
having it
already.
in terms of academic philosophy is just
This is so embarrassing.
dead on arrival, and it's just not the way to have it. And so, but I think Hume's is-ought distinction doesn't apply here. It doesn't make sense, because the only way we get to is like the basic chemistry of water is by acknowledging certain oughts, certain values that constrain our reasoning, and there are many other ways to
I
see
should
that,
just quit
that
GD.
the fact-value distinction breaks down.
I'm going to go back to science and the relationship to morality. It is not clear to me how you can use science to prove that honor killing or slavery is wrong. It seems that your theory can only claim that science teaches how to reach those goals.
Right.
But a priori, you decide that it is wrong or right, as of slavery, for example.
She listened with her ass.
Your example, another example was lying. When you said sometimes lying is the moral thing to do.
Right.
You mentioned that in the chess game also. You decide that in certain circumstances to lie is the right thing to do. And then you use science to decide what is the better way to do it. Let's say if you say stealing is bad,
right.
It's your decision, but then you use science to show us how to teach society not to steal.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm claiming to do something deeper than that, and
that's what's not clear.
Because well-being is in fact constrained by the laws of nature. It has to be. It's not completely random. There have to be right and wrong ways to maximize it. Now, if you're going to say,
but honor killing, you can't say it's right or wrong because science proved it, or slavery.
Well, no, but notice you don't say that about health. I mean, you're not.
Well, but you do say that being healthy is good, and then you use science.
Okay, so that, but right, okay, but.
This is the first time I died like that. I'm so proud of myself.
Science, every branch of science, we have to value something in order to do science. Doesn't make science unscientific.
I agree.
Okay, so it's not. So medicine doesn't become unscientific because we had to get in the door valuing health, and the fact that someone can stand at that door and say, well, who's to say that living a long life free of debilitating illness and chronic pain is healthy?
Correct.
I literally just disappeared.
Right. So that's the move.
I literally
that's sort
just.
of radical skepticism at the health door.
I quit the universe.
Right. And it's possible, and it's just as, I mean, there's not a branch of science that can survive that criticism. You know, the biblical physicist who says it's all about Genesis for me, and I'm a physicist, we don't have to talk to that person on the way to the physics conference. Okay. But somehow, on our way to the morality conference, we have to talk to the Pope and Mullah Omar and everyone else who's got their idea about, you know.
Actually, it's operational. It's not value.
Well, no, but
you can use science to decide if the world is round or flat, but you can.
Oh, you can die actually like that. Why did I never fucking get to know this while practicing? Maybe because I've been practicing for less than 100 attempts. Alright, for 147.
If you just follow these analogies, it's just as obvious because it's.
My keyboard is uncomfortable
for me. The person who doesn't care about understanding the geometry of the Earth
no, it's fine.
Doesn't get to be part of the conversation about the geometry of the Earth. The person who doesn't care about maximizing well-being and just thinks that maybe it's a legitimate point of view to just experience the worst possible misery for everyone. There's no reason to be constrained by that person's view. And so every other view does relate to questions of human and animal well-being, and then the question is, well, then who's right about the details? So, how much suffering does slavery cause?
Right.
What if it turns out it actually doesn't cause any suffering? Well, then that's the argument to have. So, a better example than slavery is gay marriage, right? So, in our current state of discourse, we have a president who says, well, I'm against gay marriage because my faith tells me
I never died to this even in practice mode.
End of argument. Okay, it never has to proceed further than that because a faith claim can just stop the conversation. If you're going to talk about right and wrong, what I'm arguing is that you have to have some argument about the well-being of conscious creatures. You have to say, okay, I'm against gay marriage because, and following that because has to relate to all of the suffering that you imagine it's going to cause. Now, and then we're on the ground of science. Then we're talking about the effects on the human brain, the effects of various accommodations in social space. We're talking about psychology and sociology and a domain of right and wrong answers.
Still, science cannot prove that gay marriage is wrong.
Well, but science can't prove that the universe is worth understanding. Science, that doesn't make it unscientific.
I enjoyed your books and your debates. I think Interfaith in particular, that kind of suspiciously mirrored my own thoughts when I was going out of Christianity. But,
Yeah.
I want to ask a question about your debate. That you.
That took me 191 attempts. I only used practice mode primarily, and then I put a start position to practice the nasty ship. And I also have 11 unknown attempts. If we add them from start pose switching, then we end up with 202. Funny kiddo.
Debated a lot of liberal and moderate types. I think the last one I think you pretty much debated someone that agreed with you on a lot of things.
That does not, word to the wise, that does not make for a good debate.
But I just want to know if you had any plans to debate those fundamentalist apologists that a lot of religious people sort of deify.
Who did you have? I mean, I'll debate.
Like the regular ones, like Dinesh D'Souza, William Lane Craig, and all those people.
Well, I did debate Dinesh in Mexico, and I mean, it turns out first it was going to be me and Dinesh, and then many other people got invited. And in the end, it was me and Hitchens and Dan Dennett against Dinesh, Robert Wright, Nassim Taleb, and I mean, it was a circus. There was just too many people there. But no, I debated Dinesh, Rabbi Shmuley Botiak, who's every bit as lovable in the green room as he is on stage. So yeah, I mean, I debated Dinesh sort of piecemeal in that. But I mean, these debates are useful, but a little goes a long way. I'm not eager to just kind of have the same conversation over and over again.
I was trying to maintain that.
Yeah.
What are those fucking deaths, you retard?
Question. I think it's a failure of my imagination that I didn't get your chessboard analogy being equatable to a moral landscape or an ethical dilemma.
Well, I guess the only purpose of that analogy was to show that exceptions to any very useful rule don't prove that you're in a domain of where there's no right and wrong answers. I mean, chess really is a domain of just there's a finite number of games. I mean, it's a bewilderingly large number of games, but there's a right answer to whether you're on a winning path or a losing path in every possible game of chess. And yet, this rule of don't lose your queen, while just about the best rule going, admits of virtually countless exceptions. That's not a problem for the objectivity of chess or the objectivity of you being very wise to hang on to your queen. I think not lying or tolerance or some other ethical principle may in fact be like don't lose your queen. So when in doubt, obviously you got to hang on to your queen. When in doubt, obviously you want to tell the truth and be tolerant of people. But there are moments where when the Nazis rap on the door and say, do you have any Jews in the basement? That's a moment where arguably lying makes a lot more sense.
And on that, I'm kind of hoping our answer here will be no. Okay. Do you think that there is any issue or topic that science would not have something to contribute?
Well, I'm sure this will get me in trouble, but no.
I guess the problem is that he never scientifically explained why it's better to say that you have no Jews. This is something that you understand intuitively, like you just say one word different. You say no instead of yes, and then lots of people won't have to die. But can you really prove consequentially that it's better? Maybe it would be better for those Jews to die. You know, you can only look so much into the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Alright, this is fucking useless. Bye guys, I'm gonna go and kill myself.